Perfect. Um, Hi, Will. Thank you for joining me today. It's great to meet you. I know so Bouygues and Etude, we're starting to have a bit of a relationship with regards to some projects that we're working on the Passivhaus side, but I think generally, from my point of view, I've seen some of the work you're doing with Letty and also Etude generally. Like, I think you guys seem to be one of the real leaders in the UK with Passivhaus and low carbon design more generally. So maybe as a start, it'd be quite cool to get a feel for your background, what you're doing at Etude, and I suppose how you got to the place of being a specialist in Passivhaus.
Yeah, great. And thank you for inviting me, Peter. As you say, we're sort of at the beginning of our passive house journey and having these really good conversations. So yeah, it's great. But my background is a mechanical engineer and studied really sort of planes and cars and engines and things. And then decided I really didn't want to do that. And was a bit lost for a while. So I ended up working for a construction company, specialist contractor.
Hmm.
And whilst working for them, they sort of got into doing turnkey buildings at a smaller scale, and I was suddenly thrust into needing to understand Part L, understand construction detailing, and sort of learn with them to help them deliver these buildings. And during that, I discovered Passive House and a really great network of people who were so open and really sort of shared what they knew, were interested in making buildings better, which was sort of a part of this company as well. And that was great. So I decided, that was good. And I discovered this course, Passive House Designer course. And I think I went for a talk by Pete Warm, who
Oh
was
yeah,
one of the
yeah,
early
the
adopters of
legend, right?
Passive House. Yeah, it really really charismatic and sold it. I decided I wanted to go on this course, and my company wouldn't let me, so I ended up
Oh, okay.
quitting my job,
Oh,
going self-employed and doing some construction work, and then doing this course. And then over time, the sort of work I was doing became less practical construction work and more technical calculations for people or spreadsheets and building design,
okay.
and sort of caught the moment where Passive House really became something in the UK and was moving from individual homes to some of the early school projects or multi-residential developments. So yeah, that was sort of my journey. And then at some point, there was a couple of characters along the way, but once I'd started doing some building certification work with a person called Paul Smythe. It doesn't work in the industry anymore, but we
Hmm.
worked together doing certification work, and then eventually was doing a lot of work with Etude, which at the time was just one person and then two people. And that was quite nice because we brought this sort of my grassroots, really understanding buildings, delivering buildings. I was installing MVHR units. I
Okay,
was sort
yeah.
of on site with timber frames,
Hmm.
but I had an engineering background and was sort of doing this professional work. And with a sort of sustainability team from a large MEP company who decided they wanted to do better sustainability.
Hmm.
And Etude's really the sort of meeting of those two things and saying,
Okay.
as specialists, what can we do? What can we deliver? So that's the sort of background.
Hmm.
And
Hmm. Hmm.
now at Etude itself, we've got a bit of a range of work. We do passive house certification, which is how we're working with Bouygues at the moment, where we're assessing other people's work, and that's somewhere between 10 and 20% of our work. So it's quite a
Hmm.
small proportion. The biggest proportion is actually design work. So both on new buildings and existing buildings, we act as the energy consultants, passive house designers if it's a passive house project, and do a bit broader. We do like overheating calculations, anything to do with building simulation,
Yeah.
really. That's what we're interested in.
Hmm.
And it extends through to post occupancy as well. So sort of comparing the modelling part with the real outcomes. And then the remaining parts is we do some strategic work. So again, primarily from a modelling or sustainability point of view, but it might be sort of creating evidence bases, or it might be looking at many more buildings and the sort of things we need to do to reduce carbon emissions or reduce cost, or yeah.
So for
So
sort of
yeah,
like local authorities and decision
exactly.
makers and
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
or it might
Yeah.
be estates like
Hmm.
estates who own a lot of buildings, or yeah, commercial developers even who've got some building stock. So yeah, it's interesting. We get to work on lots of smaller things. It tends to be
Mm,
smaller projects,
okay.
and we're a consultant, so you don't actually get to do the doing, make the final decision. But hopefully we really try to have impact and see projects all the way through as well. I've got a project at the moment that's just finished where I look back and we started on it in 2017. We were there, Reba Stage 2 design concept,
Mm.
and it's not even a big building. It's just these things take time to go all the way through, and then finally there's a completed building which we can go and visit. It's good.
And
Yeah,
and that's the great thing, isn't it, about working construction is hopefully seeing the thing at the end that once
yeah,
was a drawing on paper or just a little model on a computer. So, well, really
yeah.
interesting. I think it's interesting you talk about how you started on the kind of the grassroots installation, and then you've had this journey onto the more technical design side. I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine having that, being a specialist in Passivhaus and everything that Passivhaus requires, that attention to detail, looking at site installation in more detail than you maybe would on a typical project. Do you think though that early beginnings of your career has almost tuned you into being the Passivhaus certifier and consultant that you are, and that you have that background in practical, and that really I suppose um, strengthens what you can bring to a project?
I think it certainly helps. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
I wouldn't ever claim to be a particularly great builder or contractor, but I definitely have done a bit.
Yeah.
And that sort of practical understanding really, I think it just helps you talk the language and
Mm.
helps you understand some of the other drivers, the other challenges, which tend to be around speed and cost. But yeah, and also win a bit of trust as well, be able to
Yeah.
talk to people and understand what they're telling you
Mm.
gives you quite a good starting point to be able to say how we might do it better. One of the
Yeah.
parts I'm really interested in, I do quite a lot around construction quality as well and the sort of delivery end. And it's a common problem for main contractors to have across all sorts of their work in terms of how do we deliver quality in a fast, cost effective and speedy way, um, and sort of targeting insulation and airtightness and the sort of center of the construction as well as finishes and the landscaping or whatever it um, is a nice challenge. And I think we have some good conversations and we try and sort of help contractors along that route as well, because they're dealing with the same thing as a main contractor. You've got a lot of trades who are arriving
Yeah.
on site, got lots of different people. So that sort of instilling a little bit of pride, a little bit of just making them realise what's needed,
Yeah.
and what good looks like, what we're sort of
Mm.
expecting. I
Hmm.
think is really important. I've been amazed how little it happens. I think it's sort of the industry's got to a point where it's been honed down to the minimum. Often you're getting what's needed and nothing more, and which is fine as long as we make sure everything that's needed is included.
Yeah.
And sometimes you think you're getting things that not, or it's convenient for everybody that those things just don't happen because it means the
Yeah.
price is lower. And so I think picking those up, and that's what Passive House has sort of taught us to help with the industry. So even on non-passive house projects now, we can sort of pick up some of these things, and increasingly we might be, a consultant for a client through the construction process, or even
Mm.
with contractors through the construction process, even though it's not a passive house building. So that can a sort of interesting upshot of of what we've been doing.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
for sure. Like I think what the whole quality element is something that I've tried to push for as a kind of additional motivation or reason why, certification is ideally what you want to do. But I suppose I feel like more and more that as what you've said, Will, already is like you're instilling that same mindset onto every project. And I suppose I don't know what you think, but it's probably that kind of teething, well, what's the right word? That transition period where are people asking, oh, why are you going to that level of detail? It's not a passive fast
yeah,
project, or like, oh, why do
yeah,
we care about that? But then I suppose in your mind, 5 years down the line, when people are
yeah,
occupying this building, you'll rest easy because you
yeah.
know that the quality's in there, and yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of that. I think I mean, the main motivation, and I think which people can buy into, is like the outcomes of what we
Yeah.
want, because normally everyone gets behind the fact that we want to build the best building we can. You know, that's the
Mm.
point of being here. That's why we've drawn the drawings, why we've made the plans, why we're working on site. So there's that sort of nice outcome. And then if we've sort of saying the outcome is, reducing energy bills, like trying to reduce the energy consumption, often, even in a very standard building, we've still got Part L. We've still got manufacturer guidelines on how their product should be installed. And for insulation in particular, often that says something which often isn't done on site. So it's often just sort of pointing out what they should be doing
Mm.
um, rather than introducing anything new, really. And actually, that's sort of a common theme as well, that we're not. I'm sort of quite a firm believer that we've got all the technology we need. I'm sure new things will come and brilliant, but we can deliver net zero and we can deliver, really good buildings with everything we've got already.
Yeah.
It's more a question of like the designing a good delivery,
Mm.
and then like a good team, good planning. That's one thing I think we sort of could start. I mean, we're sort of starting a project together. The planning of the quality checks and the
Mm.
planning of benchmarking, so that people who are doing work are really, really aware of what they've got to do. They know what it looks like. They're confident, and they are providing the quality record almost as showing off. It's
Yeah.
like, yes, look, this is what great work we did. That's really what we
Yeah.
want to get to,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
and it's sort of, yeah, and that's sort of planning it ahead and having the key points in. So, it can be that we get to projects where it's gone almost the other way, and people are so worried about it that they're almost overdoing it and over checking people's work, and no one likes to be micromanaged. So we want to sort of, be confident that people know what's required of them, and then that, yeah, just keep the record as we go along.
Yeah, that
So
that that rem that reminds me of something because I had a chat with Sally Godber a few weeks ago, and she mentioned an interesting thing which kind of linked to what you said or reminded me, which was that like a roofing, I think it was a roofing supplier, roofing subcontractor. It's the first Passive House project they'd worked on, and they said like for the first time in 12 years they're actually proud of what they've done because there
mm,
wasn't that issue of like I guess everything you've mentioned previously around it's all about program minimum standards. We just need to get this done in, I don't know, the time frame that we've been given. And then it's that sense of pride coming back into work, into their
yeah.
work. And I guess ideally instilling that moving forward, regardless of the project, right?
Yeah, I mean
That's,
that would be great. I think Passive House is a good, because it's a building standard and
yeah,
it's construction that matters. So when practical completion goes, it says, okay, at that moment, this building was good,
yeah,
and it delivered. And actually, often we don't really get that. We don't get told that we've done a good job. It's like either you get told something's wrong, to hear from them again.
yeah,
So it's quite nice that there's actually something which is a bit more positive, and there's like, actually, no, yeah, that was good and it met this standard, and well done everyone. Let's get around the table, go for a meal or whatever, and yeah, and sort of pat ourselves on the back. So
yeah, no, for
yeah,
sure. So yeah, as I mentioned, Etude, Etude is one of the leaders. The way I see it, one of the leaders, especially with certification and design as well. And I suppose it would be interesting for me to understand from your perspective how you've seen the growth of appetite with the Passive House certification standard. Are there any things that have surprised you recently with regards to uptake, or do you still see it as something that the word still needs to get out more widely about the benefits? Because from my perspective, I've certainly seen from our side when we tender for projects or sometimes want to develop the projects, there is certainly more of an appetite, and you see, you see on the employer's requirements passive house certification, whereas maybe 6 years ago it would be
mm,
passive house principles,
yeah, yeah,
which is like a
or
swear word in my head.
yeah, or best
Um,
endeavours. That was the other one I had. Best
yeah,
endeavours to achieve passive house. Quite like that one.
exactly. Yeah, I don't know.
Uh,
So, what have you
yeah,
seen from your side? Because I'm more
yeah,
from the
yeah,
contractor side, and it's been
yeah,
10 years since I was a consultant. But yeah,
yeah. So I mean, it's really nice to say we're seen as the leaders, because we never really see it like that. We're sort of much more, we're a small company. We do what we can in very sort of narrow parts, and we sort of try and be really outward looking and sort of, and collaborate with others. And I think lots of the work is a lot of collaboration between sort of small
Mm.
companies in different specialisms. And from a certification point of view, really we came in on the coattails of the likes of Warm and Mead Consulting, and actually the BRE as well, who were
Hmm.
quite early adopters and probably did quite a lot of the hard work in terms of offering it as a service when
Okay.
the, it was difficult to do. There probably wasn't much money in it,
Mm.
and so yeah, I think that's good. We tried to make it more, come up with a process, make it more lean, work out what's needed, and sort of show our value. So I think we've done, we do quite a good job of that. In terms of the market as a whole, I don't think I've ever thought that there would be a moment when all buildings were passive house. I think I really see it as this sort of moving the frame of reference to show what's possible, and to have these buildings which are working really well. And we've seen that a little bit with the sort of creation of the net zero carbon building standard, which is coming through, which has got the promise to be really a good building standard, and brings together a lot of all building sectors pretty much, to sort of level up what they're all doing.
Mm.
When you've got
Mm.
data centers and healthcare and
Mm.
offices and schools
Yeah.
all doing completely different things. And it's really interesting to see that the sectors where Passive House is operating have already got really great buildings that already meet the requirements for UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. So, and
Mm.
other sectors haven't got that,
Yeah.
and so that sort of shows that it's like really good as a vanguard just to show what's possible. And the sectors where there's not that have, their targets are much higher. They're really saying, oh, it's not possible, and so that's the value is in that sort of shifting what good looks like, I think. And then just the scale and uptake. I think the thing which moved most was not necessarily the number of projects, but just the scale. So it went from,
Mm.
at some point being, I'd say like 90% of the projects on our books would be single homes.
Well, yeah.
And now it's more like 10% of the projects are single homes, and everything else is from blocks of flats to schools, school campuses,
Yeah.
university buildings, offices. So that's the big movement, is the scale's gone up, which makes a lot of sense, because if you're trying to be energy efficient, doing bigger things and
More impact.
larger form factor being mass, then is a lot more cost effective. It's much
Yeah.
harder to do smaller buildings. I remember actually we certified some homes on Elephant Park, which is the development next to Elephant and Castle
Yeah.
on the old Haygate estate,
Mm.
and it was 15 townhouses, a terrace
Okay.
of 15 townhouses, like the most premium houses on the whole site.
Yeah. Especially
Um,
now. Yeah.
yeah, and there was a huge block next to it, a block of flats, and I remember standing on this awkward um, balcony with the contractor, and he was just like, one of the site managers. He's just like, I really don't know why we're not doing passive house on that block, because it'd be a hell of a lot easier than homes. So that's the sort of, that really is
When he said it was
true.
easier,
Repetition.
what, because he saw, was it because he or she saw the benefit of, or that it wasn't too different
Just
in the way it was designed, or
Yeah,
more
I think it's
operation
repetition. So the
repetition?
repetition of details, on these homes. They were small, no, they're big houses, but they were much smaller building,
Mm.
and
Mm.
they had a bay window, they had an
Mm.
inset terrace, they had
That's
three
interesting.
different roof types. Every single window is different size or
Mm.
whatever. The block next door, there's one window type across the whole facade. It's a flat facade. There's a lot of repetition, and
Mm.
that's what you get from those guys. And just the simplifying install as well. You can imagine installing insulation on a massive flat surface, around repeated windows is very easy, because you can get your cutting plan, you can lay it out. Whereas when you've got very fiddly detailing and ins and outs, it's loads more cuts, it's loads
Right.
more
Yeah.
work. And so I think that's where they were coming from, that sort
So it
of
made more sense to
repetition.
actually flip it, or obviously ideally do both the townhouses and the big flat as
Yeah,
passive house, but almost like it would have been easier to do it the other way around, and you save more
exactly.
energy.
Yeah, the pilot would have been better on the
Yeah.
bigger blocks, basically. It would have been an easier place to do it. Plus, they'd have ended up with less insulation. They wouldn't have had to, but yeah. So,
That's the thing, right? That's the thing. I
yeah,
think that's something that I'm trying to do my best to communicate to colleagues and other people that we talk to. The myths about passive house. that the I suppose the biggest myth from our point of view is, oh, it adds 10 to 15% capex, and it's like, no, because you have to think about it in a different
Yeah,
way. Because as you say, if depending on the form factor, which I think,
yeah,
because it's not a regulations requirement or a Part L requirement, because it does the notional assessment method, form factor, it can have a huge impact on, as you say, like the thickness of the insulation, and therefore the wall build up and the architecture and how much internal area you have, etc., etc., etc. And
yeah,
it's those kind of things, isn't it, that like
yeah.
demystify the myths, I think is
That's it.
something
Yeah,
that I've
yeah.
talked about a
I
lot.
think the percentage capex stuff as well. I always think like where are your
Yeah,
business as usual numbers from? Like you're definitely from the 2000s, early 2000s, and it's that sort of baseline. It never quite keeps up with what they're costing against, so it's
yeah,
always quite a dated, older thing. So I think whenever I hear those, I make sure that okay, well, what's this magical thing which is costing 15% less? Show me the cost plan for that,
yeah,
and then I'll add in the bits that we need for Passivhaus. It's almost doing it that way around's a bit easier, and you end up with much lower numbers. Yeah. So yeah, cheap. In a London context, the London plan means that the baseline is already very very good.
mm,
There's choices around how you achieve that,
yeah,
and some of the choices are less good and get less good outcomes. So what we try and do is see Passivhaus as a good way of sort of delivering London plan well or delivering
hmm,
Part L results well. So some councils have quite significant percentage reductions over Part L in their local plan,
yeah,
and by using a fabric first approach to deliver that, we sort of feel we get the best outcome or the intention over their intentions,
yeah,
rather than plastering it with PV or using some convenient assumptions about heating control, you know, that give you these percentage reductions, but maybe don't deliver for the residents.
yeah.
So yeah,
No, it
yeah,
makes sense. Have you noticed this? It could be controversial, and you feel free to not. But have you noticed any kind of let's say, not issues, like that's not the right word because it's not about that, but like conflicts between those local planning guidance where it's generally on a regulation methodology, and then you have your passive house building. And I've certainly from my own experience found it, if you design a low form factor, you almost it doesn't benefit you with the regulation assessment,
yeah, yeah,
especially
yeah,
for
yeah.
non-domestic.
Yes, yeah, no, that's really
um,
true. Yeah, it's
and
sort
heating
of
systems as well, and I don't know, yeah, I think.
yeah, yeah. So essentially, because you're always compared to a notional building, and the notional building is the same building as yours, same form factor.
Mm,
If you have a building which is really complicated shape, it's much easier to get a better percentage reduction.
yeah.
But I think, I mean, although that is a sort of technical fact, I don't think you'd ever choose to build like a really expensive building which has got really complicated form just to pass
Just
Part
to
L.
pass it. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean, it is true the numbers that is true in the numbers, but in practice, I don't think it ever happens because
Yeah.
the QS has already had their say. There's already less corners
They've already cut
and
all of the three
yeah,
corners, I think, as I talked to someone else about. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, if buildings have four corners, every other corner
Yeah.
costs money. So yeah. Um, so that's I think that part of it, there's not too much tension.
Yeah.
Um, we have had it where the wall U values in particular on a project were pushed more to meet the Part L requirements
Mm,
than for
mm.
Passivhaus. So that's quite rare, but we did have it. Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's a part of it.
No, cool. And
Yeah.
and I guess going back to the UK net zero carbon building standard, yeah, I think so. My interpretation of it, because I was a little bit involved in the schools group, but
Mm.
kind of not a lot. I was towards the end. And looking at the guidance that came at the end of it, and I know they're doing pilots now. Um, Yeah, like it's all about performance, which is great. It's all about, you get your sticker, your badge by proving you're consuming within a certain level, dependent on the type of building that you're providing, which is definitely good because it's shifting the dial to outcome based or performance based, which I think people like ourselves, are that's what we want. We want it to perform the way it should rather than just tick the box on paper. And then I think what you were mentioning earlier is that, Passivhaus is a standard where it does have a proven track record of um, good outcomes and assuming there's no teething areas with regards to commissioning, it's consuming more or less what we predicted it to because the nature of the PHPP model was very, very detailed, etc. Um, and it also, I guess, there's parallels with the schools in Scotland where again it's outcome based funding, and therefore a lot of people chose to do passive house.
Mm.
So I guess from that aspect, I would probably see it would make sense in terms of a lot of projects to who are going for the UK net zero carbon building standard to certainly target passive house certification for
Yeah.
definitely residential.
Mm.
Schools probably, although the DFE
Mm.
does have certain employer requirements,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, because there's not a
Yeah.
lot, is there? There's
Yeah.
not a
No,
lot in the
I agree.
methodology, isn't it? It's more kind of
Exactly. Yeah. They're
yeah,
sort of doing different and quite complementary things because
yeah,
Passivhaus provides you sort of design methodology and a process through design to do the sort of quality checks, make sure that the energy calculations have been QA'd and make sure then that the construction's being QA'd so that it delivers what we hope it's going to. But it stops at it stops at completion, let's say, not necessarily PC, but it stops certainly within the 12 months defects, and it's really based on. I sort of like to say it's what what leaves the factory gate. So
mm,
quality assurance in manufacturing is often about making sure that your widget is high enough quality so that when you post it off to the consumer, you're sort of as confident as possible that it's good quality. And that's what Passive House does. So up to the factory gate, it doesn't do anything afterwards. The net zero carbon building standards come and said for the operational part of it, it has to be measured, and therefore it's after, it's in completion, but it doesn't say anything about how to do the design, how to
mm,
quality manage, how
yeah,
to do any of that earlier part. So yeah, they are really they're sort of looking for the same outcomes, but doing it in quite different ways. And that's sort of yeah, I suppose yeah, I'm quite involved with the net zero carbon building standard now, but I'm quite late to the party, so I've taken
okay,
over from my colleague as on the technical steering group as
okay,
a representative for Letty.
hmm
Um, so I'm slowly getting my feet under the table and sort of learning a bit more about it, and mostly around the sort of history of how they arrived at the pilot standard,
hmm
um, which is quite interesting. And there's very much a belief that what is needed is this in-use performance measurement, which I really buy into. I think that's a great
yeah,
idea. I mean, if you go back, sort of Adrian Lehman and Bill Bordas were saying this like years and years ago, and the sort of whole soft landings process
mm,
sort of was there to do that, and I sort of really yeah, to completely agree with that. I just think Passive House is also useful,
yeah,
or the
yeah,
sort of approach for Passive House, because it catches it when you can still have an impact.
yeah,
So you can still change things, you can still realise that something's not right and change the design. Um, the commissioning, especially the sort of seasonal commissioning part, I think is a sort of grey area at the moment because strictly you could certify to Passive House based on the commissioning day zero.
yeah,
Um, but we know from experience that often that isn't the setup isn't maybe quite right, and the occupants need to use the building, and things are often changed later, particularly for complex buildings. And I don't think Passive House really has a great way of dealing with that at the moment. We sort of almost have to engineer it and delay certification or
okay,
have a check later.
mm,
So that is a bit of a challenge, which I think, sort of slight grey area, and that's sort of soft landings would answer that. But depending how it's applied, it can be a bit too meaty. It can be a bit
okay,
too heavy. So, and you don't want adding costs. We could do everything, but then there's obviously costs associated with that, and it's yeah, we need to do things with a reason.
mm,
So yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I
nice,
think the UK this the sort of thought of having real building data is both fantastic and also as an energy consultant, having done some of these calcs, also quite scary because suddenly a bit like in Scotland, there's going to be a lot of held to account and calculations, which ultimately are, you're always going to be wrong because you're trying to predict how people live and use a building, which we can't possibly know. So it'd be interesting to see what happens, how that sort of gets more sophisticated, and
yeah,
if you think of weather forecasting and
mm,
how forecasts are always wrong and forecasters get completely harangued, and yet we have this sort of ever more and more and more sophisticated forecasting models that simulate the weather years and years in advance. I sort of hope we don't just become weather forecasters and get always wrong. Always told us, oh, it did rain today. Oh, the building did use more energy. Or yeah,
No,
um,
I 100% agree. And I mean, data, we could have a whole chat, like an hour about the importance of
yeah,
data. Um, and yeah, I agree. I think getting more, let's say, detailed data, even of end use, so heating, cooling, etc., etc.
mm,
I think we, I think that there are some parties who, especially who manage estates, who have a wealth of data and almost like riches of data, more than they could think they need. And then there's, I suppose, parties like ourselves who we generally deliver the project unless we are also operating it, which is more rare. We wouldn't necessarily get access to the data. And even if we could get access to the data, we have to be careful about, is it being logged? Is there any gaps, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole data processing element, I think is, in my opinion, it's more complicated than it probably sounds because it's like, okay, you get your energy bill, that's fine. And it's like,
yeah,
but then you have to do some processing and understand is there any gaps? And then also how does it relate to the internal area? So have that benchmarking that people like me and you
yeah,
understand around energy use intensity. But yeah, I mean, is there going to be a fit? Maybe in the short term, people like ourselves that will get our questions like, okay, why does it perform like this? But then maybe you
yeah.
can go into the detail.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to
But
dig out. I'm sure there will
yeah,
be those questions. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I completely agree with you on the difficulty of getting these numbers. We got a lot to learn, and whenever we've tried to do this, there's always been some issue or other. Sometimes it's like completely fundamental, and you can't do the work you set out to do. Other times it's like just annoying niggles, but it's very difficult both to get just the raw data, and I suppose annual total energy consumptions tend to be possible because they're paid for.
yeah,
Someone ultimately knows how much you used because they want to charge you for it. But even that now with PV installations isn't straightforward. If we're looking for consumption, someone's
mm,
got a PV array installed and we're only getting import, we haven't got an export meter, then suddenly we don't even know that. Plus now we don't have a gas probably, or certainly not for net zero carbon building standards. So there might only be one meter. You don't even have a split between heating and hot water. So it all
yeah,
gets quite complicated. And yeah. So plus people are involved. That's the worst thing. Oh, I switched that off. I didn't think it was needed. Yeah. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I've got a school project which we completed a couple of years ago, and sort of now seeing better occupancy, and even that we knew the handover wasn't ideal, and we were on the client side, and the contractor, ultimately had difficult relationships with MEP, and it all gets pushed to the end, and we know that that wasn't as good as it could have been. But we've I just did some really recently, just looking at energy use intensity, thinking, oh, it should be less because the school's not full yet. And both the new blocks are using more energy consumption than we sort of anticipated, sort of like 20% more,
And
which
were
is
you able
too
to
much.
interrogate that? Like,
Well, we're trying
was it?
to,
Yeah,
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 I've
yeah,
got my
yeah.
suspicions. I think a
Mm,
common feature is ventilation control going
mm,
awry somehow.
mm,
Fans running 24/7 when they shouldn't be, or at maximum speed when they shouldn't be, is quite common because it's very difficult for the users to realise. Pumps and fans, unless they really know how the building should operate, um, it's not something that gets quizzed or flagged up. So I suspect that's part of it, because it's consistent between the buildings as well.
mm, mm.
So there's probably a similar thing wrong. Um, but yeah, we'll have to dig into that. It'll be interesting to sort of find out, and necessary step. Unfortunately, no one's paying for it. um, that's the difficult thing, isn't it? It's like
Yeah, that's probably why we
yeah,
haven't got the progress we wanted, isn't it? It's
yeah,
that
yeah. I
the
need
whole
some
the whole chicken
innovative,
and egg. Yeah.
innovative business model where I remember someone telling me about a light bulb replacement company who used to just go into commercial property and say, "Oh, I replace light bulbs," and then they say, "Oh, we don't need anyone who replaces light bulbs," and then there'd be a sort of business model which is essentially, "Oh, well, these ones have gone, oh, and do you have a step ladder license? And what if your employee falls off the step ladder? And oh, how much do you pay them? And is it worth it? And actually, it's much cheaper just for me to replace the light bulbs." I'm sure they've models can since LEDs and it's much less for light bulb replacement, but I think we need a bit of that for post-occupancy evaluation, where you see it a little bit with the energy service companies, where they say, "Oh, okay, we'll come and do this for free, but we'll take 50% of the savings,"
Mm.
and so whatever percentage it is. Wonder whether we need a bit of that for post-occupancy. Yeah, the likes of us consultants need to see a bit of value in it as well and invest, I think, because if we could get good figures for actual, I don't know, lighting power intensity. So we knew, oh, we've got 10 other schools and they
Yeah.
achieve this on average. We know we've got it measured.
Mm.
Then that's got a value to it, which is value to us, not value to the client. So perhaps we should be putting more investment in it as well.
Yeah, no, I mean it's definitely something that like I've tried to push within Bouygues, and sometimes it's really strange conversations like oh, why do we not have the log data for a year? And it's like, oh, because we didn't pay for the memory, and like the memory is like 20
Yeah,
quid
yeah,
or something. And it's like
that's really
it's
common.
small
Yeah,
things like this, and you just got to start to
yeah,
integrate it. And we do have
yeah,
these things like Smart Impulse that tries to change that. And but yeah, that
yeah,
until it's seen as a enough value, which I'm hoping the net zero carbon building standard will start to
yeah.
make normal, isn't it? Because you're reporting the actual usage. I know in the GLA there's the be seen as well,
Hmm, hmm.
but not necessarily a target. It's more let's start to get the industry used to disclosing operational energy, and then
Yeah,
the way I interpret it anyway is over time we'll start to bring in certain benchmarks and targets.
yeah, yeah. Or publicize it. No one wants to be
Yeah.
bottom of the league table. So,
Yeah.
and it's harder to rent a building there. That it costs a lot. So they do that, and I think in Boston, there's a place I think in Australia as well, through the neighbours standard. But in Boston,
Mm.
they've got a Boston energy map, and they have
Okay.
commercial buildings have to publicise their energy consumption, so that if you're renting a building, you can sort of see how your one performs compared to others, which
Yeah.
is quite
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
No, no, I'm sure. And
Uh,
we could probably a tech whiz could probably do that with the public buildings, right? Because of the DCs and the fact that,
yeah,
it's a legal obligation to do DCs, which sorry, DECs, display energy certificates.
yeah,
Um, it yeah, at least we have some data, and
yeah,
normally when
yeah,
we're looking at schools and stuff like that, at least we know sort of how it's consuming. We're still ending up having probably, just gas, electricity. We don't have the breakdown, but um,
yeah,
even to be honest, even those buildings, at least you get an indication that okay,
yeah,
it's kind of in line and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's more power in data, which I'm hoping. So yeah, really really interesting that you're getting involved in the net zero carbon building standard. I mean, how is that? I know that the beta testing, and if you can't say anything, no worries. But like, how is that process going? Is it sort of starting to ramp up and kind of yeah?
yeah. So the pilot version was launched the end of last year, or sort of in the autumn last year, and now there's a um, pilot testing phase with, I think, it's about 200 buildings
Okay.
who are basically doing some of the assessment
Hmm.
and um, and answering sort of technical questions, with the idea to develop version 1, which will
Yeah.
be a tweak on the pilot version, which will be launched in the autumn this year.
Okay.
And then it'll be sort of a standard, and there'll be a body to validate buildings against to it. I mean, we talked about the operational energy and sort of reporting in use, but the other big thing that it adds is a way of validating embodied carbon calculations.
Hmm.
Because at the moment you've got a bit of a free for all of, people are reporting their numbers, people are doing calculations, which is great. You've got some clients even setting a requirement, um, but actually there's no QA, or there's the RIC standard, but actually there's no available validation of that. So
Hmm.
another
Hmm.
thing that the standard will offer is a sort of way of that being checked, and then
Okay.
we know that things are comparable like for like. Because at the moment, I think we've got lots of things reported, but we're not completely sure whether they're like for like, and that's again that's another challenge. It's certainly not simple. So yeah, it's a good sort of good thing that's coming out of it as well.
Perfect. That sounds great. And
Yeah,
I know that we sort of were introduced or really looked into embodied carbon in I think 2020 or 2021 when we had our own corporate targets that we were trying to form around 30% in scope three emissions, which at that time it it was quite different because there was a lot of companies saying scope one and two because that's what was reported. So the carbon emissions associated with your building operations, but not necessarily scope three, which is sort of what's the correct word? I can't remember, but it's like the things that so in our case
result.
because we build buildings, it's the
Yeah,
we're
the
not
sort of
operate.
resultant
Yeah,
emissions.
the
Yeah,
resultant.
yeah,
Thank you. The resultant
yeah,
emissions of our products and
yeah,
our things. So yeah, we did a lot of work actually on using one-click LCA and trying to understand our baseline. And like I think when we were using a more simplified tool, let's say it was maybe the carbon emissions was here, and then we used one-click LCA and it was up here because we were looking at
yeah,
everything more, and then it starts coming down. And I think that's the idea. It's like you get your
yeah.
benchmark right, which, as you're saying, hopefully that standard starts to build a picture of this is a robust set of assumptions or
Yeah,
products and
yeah.
embodied carbon
There's
limits and
level
yeah.
of detail to go to, and I think also creating a bit of a market for the manufacturers, which is sort of existing now, to make a bit of
Yeah.
effort to promote it, publicize it. Because EPDs, will always they're quite a slow thing to create, and there's a lot of detail in there, so they tend to be quite out of date. And almost as soon as they're ready, they're a little bit out of date.
Yeah.
Um, and that's sort of got its challenges. But the the sort of part of it, the more work you do, the higher the number goes because the more
Yeah.
things you've got to
Yeah,
work
that's
out
what we
and
found.
add in. Yeah, so but that's good to know, isn't it? We need to know
Yeah.
that so that we
Yeah.
can sort of work to reduce it. Yeah, so I think that's an important part of the standard. Yeah, so that's all probably that's worth sharing, I suppose, on the standard. I think it's really good. I think a big part of it though is that industry coming together and saying this is what's needed
Yeah.
and this is what we want to do across all building sectors. Um, I think my personal opinion is that I imagine the actual numbers and even perhaps the quantity of numbers will change and will be tweaked over time as we get more evidence.
Yeah.
Um, but it's hard to unpick. It's not possible to challenge some of them at the moment because we just don't have the
Don't have the
data on it.
data.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, no,
Um,
really interesting. And I suppose so moving forward, so how do you see it? How do you see, I suppose, what's your dream or what's your ambition for, I suppose, both what Etude are doing with Passivhaus and also low carbon or low energy or low carbon design in general, and then I suppose also your involvement in the I mean, I know that you're involved in Letty and now being representative on Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. I mean, what's your outlook? How are you
mm.
feeling? Are you feeling
Yeah,
positive?
yeah.
Are you
Okay,
feeling
yeah, yeah.
like we're going to make that change? Do you get indications from, let's say, decision makers, policy makers, etc., that
Yeah.
we're getting there?
Yeah.
Where
I
are you at?
think where I'm at, yeah.
Where's your cup at?
Ask me in 5 years again. I'm always a cup half full person, and I think the targets are set as a
Yeah.
direction of travel,
Mm.
and whether we achieve exactly that or not quite, or even maybe better, but like then it doesn't matter too much. It's a direction of travel, and pulling in the same direction. And I'm interested in trying to get there in whatever
Yeah.
way that is and making the moves to do it. Um, I'm not that interested in arguing about exactly what the target should be or, the sort of too much of the um, background or justification behind it. I think it's useful to have some like concrete things to aim for
Yeah.
and to spend our time working out how to get there very
Mm.
practically,
Mm.
because it's sort of inevitable. I think the bit that so that's a sort of very practical end. There's a sort of middle bit which is like, oh, exactly how many degrees can we cope with and how many degrees will it be? You know, for me, it's like every 0.1 degree or whatever matters. So we just
Yeah.
do the best we can. That's what
Mm.
we've got to just keep doing. That's sort of how I sort of operate and want to work in construction. I feel that there's a lot of there's been good examples. Some of the buildings we still point to as good examples were built in like 2010. They're 15 years old, so we can do it.
Yeah,
And
we
the
can do
sort
it.
of,
Yeah.
yeah, the confidence of being able to do it is there. I think the, the sort of hesitation or the slowing is really around the cost of construction has just jumped so high. Nothing to do with carbon, net zero carbon, or passive house at all. There's just been an increase in construction costs, mainly through materials, but also in labour as well. Um, I think construction has been a bit cheap for a long time, and I don't think it's a bad thing that people have to think more about building and do, maybe perhaps fewer buildings better. It's not great for the industry as a whole because that means there'll be winners and losers, and it might not be able to support such a big industry. But I think there'll be opportunities to sort of repurpose as well. We certainly need a lot of retrofit. We need a lot of
Mm,
heat pump rollout. We need a lot of those complex tasks which aren't a new building, but probably use a lot of the same skill set in terms of project management, overview, contract administration to deliver a lot. And so I think that's probably one part of it. Maybe the new build sector, it is expensive. All construction is expensive. We need to think about it more, do the right
mm.
stuff, and then there'll be sort of repurposing and doing other work that's different. Um, yeah, does that
Yeah,
seem
no,
positive? I don't
yeah,
know.
no,
About the
that's
right
great,
sort of
and
direction. Yeah.
it definitely reminded me of, well, there's a couple of things. So I think when we were looking at our carbon strategy, our technical director at the time said, what was it? The best way to save carbon is to not build anything. And it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
of course. And I think what we've found in France as well with policy is that more and more there's an emphasis on reuse and
Mhm.
refurbishment and
Yeah.
almost the retrofit. Burst or retrofit plan and as you say it's almost like you're almost forced in a way through let's say the financial and different mechanism or constraints, let's say, think really hard about whether we should build
Mm.
or other alternatives. And I mean retrofit was always my way into low carbon energy because that's what my dissertation was on and stuff like that, but and it's something I'm passionate about because I grew up in a very old leaky building. But I do see like it will be interesting to see how retrofit happens or accelerates because there are so many different types of building. I think there's this ambition from what I see, both internally and externally, for like almost like an off-the-shelf solution of get your, I don't know, pre-constructed panel and put it on the front of a external wall and it will all work. But in reality, we do have a lot of different building stock of different ages and
Mm.
different standards. And I think
Yeah.
it's pretty difficult to justify there's a one approach that
Yeah,
fits
yeah.
all. And
I,
I
I
think we
I
have to do a
completely
lot of
agree with
work.
that. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I also think that the what we're expecting has changed a bit. I think with the delivery of decarbonised electricity and the sort of trajectory that is still on, which is so positive
Yeah.
and a real success story for the UK. Um, and yeah, and the advent of like heat pumps and heat pump air to water heat pumps being a solution that can work for UK homes, um, means that probably what we're aiming for is slightly different than we were before. So I
Mhm.
think 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or probably 5 years ago, I'd been saying, yeah, fabric efficiency. We need better. We need to improve the fabric efficiency of all homes. Whereas now I think we do, but that's for cost of running it, air quality, comfort reasons. If we're just focusing on carbon, it's heat pump rollout.
Yeah.
We double glazing and a bit of loft insulation, add a heat pump. That's what's required, and I think that changes the picture quite a lot for the delivery to be scaled up. And we do want to do the fabric improvements, and there will be opportunities to do that, and we should take the opportunities wherever they are. But we shouldn't be sort of stifled that we can't do
Mhm.
anything because it's way too complicated and there's too many
Yeah.
homes. We should
Yeah.
be getting on with it, the other part.
Mm. Yeah.
So yeah, there's
Makes
still a lot
sense.
of homes which are running off an oil boiler and have got no loft insulation. So yeah, let's start with those. Yeah,
Yeah, single glazing
yeah,
this as efficient as a piece of tracing paper in your
yeah,
window.
yeah,
Like, yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Will. I appreciate it. I think, yeah, it's been really interesting talking to you. And I think certainly from the outside, I know when you're inside, I think, yeah, Etude, I think I see you guys as definitely a leader, and been really impressed with the way that you carry out the certification on your projects. So yeah, as I say to a lot of people in this, keep fighting the good fight, and I think
Yeah.
little by little we'll get there.
Yeah.
And yeah, just thank you again for joining me, and good luck with everything that you're doing, and yeah.
Great. Yeah, you too. And thank you for inviting me on your podcast. And you, it's really good. Good luck with it. And yeah, let's hope we deliver the buildings we've been talking about and on there. Cheers.
Perfect.
Thanks, Peter.